Okay, so in the first video, we looked at just kind of the basic layout of using OpenProcessing, just maybe a few little last things, or one last thing. So we looked at sketch files and editor, and there's some saving functions over here. So I can export out basically the files that would go with that. It's also a place where we can submit to a class, right? So I can set it up here. I haven't really set the assignments yet. So we'll look at that at a later date. So we're not going to worry about that. Let's get out of that. There is a version history for the saves, so we can see when I opened this, and I could go back to those. So if I'm like, actually, I want to go back to the earlier version. And there's also this reference. It looks like a little bookmark, right? So of all things, I think OpenProcessing is like totally perfect, but sometimes it takes a minute. That was actually pretty quick though. Excuse me, to find the keywords, right? And so I can do a little search if I'm like trying to figure out, well, what does background do? And then I can click on it, and of course what it does is it loads the P5 site that has the reference. So I would just say, just load when you're working in OpenProcessing. This is certainly a way to get familiar if you're working like, is that a word, is that a keyword, or what's the spelling of that, and how does that work? You could use this over here. But I always think it's just better to open up a tab. Here's the P5.js. It has all the info about it, and I'm just going to go to reference. And inside the reference, I could click on background, and here's where we were a second ago, where we can see how this works. And the nice thing about this being JavaScript is it being this kind of language of interactivity on the web is that the reference loaded into the web is editable, which is fantastic, right? So we can see here is background with a value of 51, which is a grayscale integer. And integer just means a whole number, right? And we'll talk about that stuff later on. So 51, and again, the scale, we can see way down below. Here's the description of what it does. The default color space is RGB, with each value in the range from 0 to 255. There are other color spaces that we can use, and we will use later in the semester. But again, the syntax, you can see variables. We can see the background color could be gray with an alpha channel. And we can see here's background that has color. So one, RGB and the alpha itself. So let's just scroll back up here to the top. So we're using the grayscale. Let's just say, how does this work? And I'll just look at it. Here's this little bit of code, and I'll just make it 225 and say run. And you can see now I get a lighter value. And if I click here and I say 255, which is the top of the scale, you won't see anything, right? Because it's white on white. So let's back this off just a little bit, 240, and then we'll run that. So you can see kind of a light gray against that. And if we ever need to, just want to go back to the default example here, that doesn't really make much sense, but if you had more complicated bit of reference code, being able to hit reset, or if you like, that's how that works, you could copy it and put it into your own sketch, right? The RGB values, we'll show this one real quick. Let's go to edit. So again, RGB, so the red, green, and the blue. And I will do 204 by 0 by 0, and I'll run. If I'm not mistaken, this is the numerical value for the Raider Red of Texas Tech University. Let's see if we can edit this too. I can also add a fourth value, so let's just say 100. So it's semi-transparent is that background color. And again, I can always just go back to whatever the default was that's embedded here in the website. Really cool, really nice. So anytime you're coding, I do this for myself. You should do this as well. Just always have this reference here in case you're like, wait a minute, how do I spell that, or how does that work? It's totally fine to have that and advisable to do that. So let's just close that. All right, so we had the sketch. I'm going to go back to what I had before. So instead of this, well, in fact, let's leave it there. Let's make this, what did I do in class? 800 by 600. Oops. So we saw this little error, right? So I just did something. Let's just delete this. So let's see if I can make this run. All right, so I got a little error. I just pressed play, and I got a little syntax error. And it says that I caught this error. I'm missing a parentheses. Actually, I do have a parentheses, but it doesn't understand that because I have the commas in the right place. So let's talk about this for a second, what this syntax stuff is. So in class, we talked about things that you can do and can't do. So here was one of them. What about spacing? So you can see it says 800, 600 in parentheses in the semicolon. So that works. That's fine. What if I come up here and I say, oops, I space this out. All right, so I'm just adding these spaces in here to these spaces. Will this still run? This seems odd, right? This doesn't seem like it's very pretty or works very well, right? But it still runs. So the computer itself doesn't really care about these spaces unless they're right there, okay? So these keywords themselves, so, and it could be anywhere. I could put it there, right? So it's always going to give me an error if I mess up these specific words that have to read just as is. And I can't do, right? It doesn't know what create canvas is with a capital C, right? It only understands it with lowercase. In fact, all the function words are going to have a lowercase embedded in. Sorry, I'm just checking my time. So they're always going to be lowercase at the very beginning. And if it's a double word, right, like create canvas, it would be in what's called camel case, which just means that the second word for a keyword would have a capital in here. And it just allows us to read it a little bit better, right? That's just hard to read. Create canvas, create tech and VES, right? So this capital almost lets us know that there's kind of a phonetic break there, but it's create canvas. The other thing too, if I go over to the editor, there's some shortcuts. And you can see on the Mac side, this is command. I don't know on the PC, is this control? So if you're on the PC, if you go to this, it will tell you what it is. But little command B, if I come over to it, oops, got to click in the space. Oh, actually, it doesn't seem to. Well, it did some of that, right? Hopefully you saw that. So anytime you have your coding kind of spaced funny, it won't get rid of these big spaces in here because processing or P5.js is like, oh, maybe you want that way. Maybe you want this kind of spacing in there. So that's totally fine. Or you want this kind of. So spaces are okay in here. It's like a pause in the sentence. You just don't want to pause in the middle of your words, right? Or these numbers, right? This would confuse it. In fact, you can even see here a little red mark showed up saying, hey, I'm not sure what it is that you're doing there, right? Okay, so create canvas, and then we have these places where the argument goes for these words. So a canvas needs 2 parameters. We already saw with background, kind of depends. It can take 1 parameter or 2 or 3 or 4, and it gives you different values. An ellipse needs 4. It needs to know its X and Y position, and it needs to know basically the width and the height of the radius or the diameter of the ellipse itself, because it could turn it into an oval. So I did this in class, I think. Right? So I could use an oval if I wanted to. And that is the sound you have to make when you're sketching, is some little doot-to-doot-to-do, something like that. Let's put this off to the side. All right, so I said 800 by 600 is the size. So, okay, so I have a number here. What does that mean? So it is 800 units. We can see that it's wider than it is tall, and 800 is a bigger number than 600 as it runs through here. So what does that what do we do with that? So right now we've created an ellipse that is at the mouse X and Y. I'm going to just put one that's at 300 and 400, I guess. Right? So it just put a ellipse right here, and it's just each time it's drawing it, right, in that space. In fact, before we go forward there, the other thing I wanted to show is, so the language itself, this is computer language, right? Computer talks to itself very in a stilted way with programming language. Function, setup, create canvas, 800, 600, background. Like it's just very cut and dry, right? But we don't say that. We say things like, hey, let's set this thing up and create a canvas that we can draw into later. Sorry, canvas. And let's even have initial background color, right? This is the way we talk. And you saw that I put these two little slashes here. So these forward slashes are what's called commenting. So this is the way we tell the computer, you're not allowed to see what I'm going to put on the other side of these two little slashes. This is human speak, and you don't understand this, just as I don't sometimes understand you, computer. But this is where I'm going to put human notations so that I know what I did here if it was a complicated program. So if someone comes along and needs to fix our code, they're like, oh, that's what Dane was trying to do here. Actually, he needs a semicolon, and this is the way you should factor for this, some vector or something. So there's lots of different ways you can use this. I'm going to also, you can also have more than two, right? So if in fact, let's just do one. Right? So if I just do one and I put the word setup here, you can see that it isn't grayed out. It isn't a light gray. And the reason I do this, sometimes when I have a really complicated program, I'll just put this out here with all the code justified to the left. I'll just put this out here, and I can have multiples of these. Anything that's behind 2, so this would be 2, 2, 2. So in essence, we've blocked all this out, and it just thinks that all of this is are characters, right? That's just a word. So here's the 2, and everything after it is just human speak. So I've just set this up so it says setup. Here's our draw. I might say start drawing something. And at the end, in fact, I'm going to put it after this little bracket. I'll say finished that loop. That was fun. Let's do it again. Right? I'll just put it there at the end. So again, my own little notations to help myself understand this. So the setup function happens only once, and it creates the things. And once it's done with this, it doesn't return to it. It doesn't create the canvas again. It's already created it. It's already created the background again. So this is why if I made this, mouse X, mouse Y. Let's refresh here and run again. There we go. Right? So this is why it's drawing into the screen, is because the background got drawn once. So just put it down there. Now the only thing I'm drawing is ellipse after ellipse after ellipse. Start drawing. Finish that loop. That was fun. Let's do it again. We'll start drawing again. Right? And it just keeps doing whatever is in here. And it works its way down, right? It just keeps going. Obviously, we only have one instruction, so it's a really tiny little loop. But if I did take the background color in here, and I'll use my little tidy. So you can see now the circle, the ellipse, I guess this is a circle, but the ellipse by code is following my little mouse around, okay? So why is that? And I think I asked this in class. So it's this order of operations, right? So now I've taken background. It's the same command, but we put it up in setup. We say do it at the very beginning. So that just paints the canvas once, and now we just, we paint on top of it with all the ellipses. Here would be more like creating an animation, right? So that this little ball, of course, I'm just dragging around with my mouse, but we could create some animation where it would move around the screen based on code, gravity forces that we might apply or whatever we're going to do in that space. And each time it does it, it creates a new background. So it basically erases what was there, a fraction of a second ago, and it puts a new background that puts a new ellipse, and then it erases that, puts a new background, and it puts a new ellipse. So this is how this works. And if it helps you, make these little notations right in here so that you get a good sense of like, what is it that does? Or, and it's just a tidy way. So commenting is good practice. It will help you. I also require it in class because it helps me try to help you. Help me help you. And when you put notations in there, and if you don't, you put your code, and I was like, what was the student trying to do? What was Dane trying to do here? And then if I see that, like, oh, they were trying to draw a thing over and over and over again, they probably wanted the background in a different place. Okay. So the little challenge, and let's see where we're at. Ooh, almost 20 minutes, but I'm still going to do it. In fact, you know what? I think I will pause right there. So when I come back, the challenge I gave from students in class was how to think about the coordinate system that's in this space, right? So we have something that's 800 by 600, but how do we think about that? How do we count that? What kind of grid is going on hidden to us on this space? So this will be the end of the tutorial. I'll come back and we'll try to answer that question.